to watch may make you question everything. Viewer discretion advised.
There's a conspiracy theory that says when schools labeled kids as gifted, they weren't rewarding intelligence, they were starting an experiment. According to the gifted and talented conspiracy theory, these programs were never just about education, they were about identification. The theory claims that the gifted and talented programs function as an early sorting mechanism designed to identify children with above average intelligence, creativity, or psychological sensitivity, and separate them from the general population as early as possible. Believers argue that intelligence itself wasn't the primary target. What mattered was behavior under pressure. By isolating gifted children into separate classrooms, different schedules, and higher expectations, the system created a controlled environment where stress response, compliance, adaptability, and resistance could be observed over a long period of time. The classroom, according to the theory, wasn't just a place to learn, it was a testing ground. In this framework, labeling a child as gifted wasn't descriptive, it was formative. Once labeled, a child's identity became tied to performance. Praise became conditional, approval became something that had to be maintained. Failure wasn't treated as part of learning, but as a deviation from what the child was supposed to be. The conspiracy theory claims this identity pressure wasn't accidental, it was the point. Separation played a key role. Gifted children were pulled away from their peers, placed into environments where authority figures monitored them more closely, and expectations were higher. According to the theory, this disrupted normal social development and replaced it with dependence on institutional validation. Children learned early that being different meant being watched, evaluated, and managed. Some versions of the conspiracy trace this approach back to Cold War psychology. During that era, intelligent agencies openly researched behavioral conditioning, psychological resilience, and cognitive control. MK Ultra is often referenced not because gifted and talented programs involve drugs or physical abuse, but because it established precedent. Governments were willing to experiment on human mind if they believed it served a larger purpose. The theory claims that when those experiments were exposed and outlawed, the research didn't stop, it changed form. Education, according to believers, was the perfect cover. Testing children was already normal. Separating students for advanced learning was socially acceptable. Long-term observation could be justified as academic tracking. Under the conspiracy framework, this allowed psychological conditioning to continue in a way that appeared benevolent, even helpful. The theory also explains why most gifted children don't grow up to become elite leaders. According to believers, they were never meant to. The system was designed to filter, not elevate everyone. Over time, a split occurred. Children who adapted to constant evaluation, pressure, and expectation advanced into higher academic tracks, leadership programs, and institutional pipelines. Children who resisted, burned out, or failed to conform were quietly discarded, labeled underachievers, problem students, or wasted potential. This attrition, the theory claims, wasn't failure, it was selection. Intelligence alone wasn't enough. The real criteria was emotional regulation under stress, tolerance for surveillance, and compatibility with hierarchy. Those who met those criteria remained, those who didn't were removed without force, simply by making continued participation unbearable. By adulthood, believers argue this process produced two distinct groups from the same starting pool. One group internalized authority, learned to perform under observation, and functioned effectively within government, military, corporate, or bureaucratic systems. The other group retained intelligence but carried burnout, anxiety, distrust of institutions, or identity collapse. Same origin, different outcomes. The theory claims this pattern is too consistent to be accidental. Another core claim is the conspiracy that early labeling created long term self regulation. Once a child's self worth was tied to intelligence and performance, the system no longer needed external control. Fear of failure, loss of identity, and loss of approval became internalized mechanisms. Individuals policed themselves. Compliance became voluntary. According to the gifted and talented conspiracy theory, one of the most unsettling shared details is something many former students remember clearly: being given a pink colored drink right before or during gifted testing. Juice, milk, punch, something small, forgettable at the time, but oddly consistent across stories from different school districts and even states. Believers argue this wasn't a coincidence, but a way to standardize testing conditions by controlling factors like blood sugar, anxiety, and focus before evaluations. Within the theory, the drink wasn't necessarily about drugging kids in an obvious way. Instead, it's framed as subtle regulation, nutritional or chemical, meant to place all children in a similar psychological state before testing. More extreme versions claim it could have included supplements or mild calming agents, pointing to Cold War era research where governments openly experimented with cognition, stress tolerance, and behavioral response. Children weren't told why they were given it, they were just told to drink it, then sit quietly and take the test. The test itself is seen as the second half of the process. Believers claim gifted screenings weren't only measuring intelligence, but how children handled pressure, confusion, time limits, silence, and authority. Many remember the atmosphere more than the questions, the stillness, the feeling of being watched, the sense that it mattered more than anyone admitted. In the conspiracy narrative, the pink drink and the test together marked the moment students stopped being evaluated as learners and started being observed as subjects. The gifted and talented program tests, according to the conspiracy theory, were never normal intelligence exams. They were deliberately abstract and disorienting. Kids were given pattern recognition problems with missing information, logic questions with multiple correct answers, and sequences that broke their own rules halfway through. Instructions were minimal, sometimes read only once, and asking questions was discouraged or outright forbidden. Believers say the point wasn't to see who was the smartest, but who could keep moving forward when clarity disappeared. Another major part of the testing focused on sensory processing and reaction. Some students recall exercises involving rapid visual identification, subtle differences between shapes or symbols, or a listening test where tones, words, or instructions were played quickly and never repeated. Time limits were tight, and sections were designed so most kids couldn't finish. In the conspiracy narrative, this wasn't poor design, it was intentional pressure, meant to reveal how a child handled overload, frustration, and the feeling of falling behind while being watched. Behavior, according to the theory, mattered as much as answers. Proctors pacing in the room enforced silence and instruction not to discuss the test afterward. Created an atmosphere of authority and surveillance. Believers argue the gifted and talented program was testing compliance, emotional regulation, and adaptability just as much as reasoning ability. In this view, the tests weren't asking how smart are you, they were asking how do you function when you don't understand what's happening and you're not allowed to question it. All of this, according to the conspiracy theory, was housed under one official name, the Gifted and Talented Education Program, better known as GATE. On paper, GATE was supposed to identify exceptional students and give them advanced opportunities, but believers argue the testing methods tell a different story. That GATE functioned less like an enrichment program and more like a large-scale screening system. The consistency of the test, the environment, and the rules across schools fuels the belief that this wasn't a loose educational initiative, but a tightly structured program designed to sort children based on how their minds worked under pressure, authority, and ambiguity. Eventually, the name itself began to fade. According to the theory, GATE carried too much baggage, too many shared memories, too many questions. Schools quietly rebranded it as Advanced Academics, TAG, Talented and Gifted, AIG, Honors, or Accelerated Learning, while keeping many of the same testing principles intact. To believers, the name change wasn't about modernization, but about distancing the program from scrutiny. Same system, different label, because if you change the name, fewer people compare notes.